Look, I think the biggest cynic in cricket will say that anytime a game is televised on TV, there is an element of fixing to it. You go from that to someone who doesn't believe any fixing until, News of the World does an expose on them, or someone comes forward like Lou Vincent to say everything's falling apart. There's a lot of middle ground between those two things. It's something as a cricket writer that it's so hard without any evidence to ever write about. But at the same time, there's absolutely no doubt that it is always part of the potential for anything. I mean, I don't know why you've singled out Australia, England, and India for spot fixing. I kind of think that any match can be fixed at any time. And one thing that players don't like is when I say spot fixing is match fixing. A lot of players are like, oh, it's not throwing the match. And they're not defending their actions or anything. They're trying to say that you can bowl one bad ball and it doesn't mean anything. It's like, once you fixed one ball, I hate the phrase spot fixing, because once you fix one ball, you're fixed the match, right? The outcome of that game has changed because of that one ball. There has been an element of fixing in that game. But to get back to your point, I mean, I don't know. There is no way I mean, you could ask me that about kind of any game in the world at any time, and I would have to give you the same answer. I think that it's one of these things that in private, I think it's, I can't remember if Andy Bull might have written this once, or someone like Andy Bull wrote that in athletics, there's a lot more talking about if that person is doping compared to the amount of time we talk about is that person fixing in cricket. I wonder how much of that is just that doping is athletics is an absolute sport. Look, this guy has done this time, and this time is ridiculous. Maybe they are doping. Whereas this person has played this bad shot. This person often plays bad shots. Is this person playing bad shots because they're fixing, or just because they play bad shots? There are certain patterns that I don't think you can overlook. I wrote about Srisanth before, and I certainly believe that Srisanth was someone who probably was sold under the bus for many people doing many bad things, and then he may not have actually fixed that particular game. But I do believe that he was involved in fixing, and if you have a look at his record, the amount of wides that he bowled, I think is above and beyond what you would expect from a slightly wayward swing bowler. So when you start to see patterns like that, you certainly start to think, well, maybe there's something going on here. Oh, sorry, Alan's just gone. Al Jazeera had a documentary highlighting England in New Zealand 2016, Australia in 2017. Well, it's interesting, Alan, because you say that they provided damning evidence. The ICC looked at all of that evidence. Individual cricket boards looked at all that evidence. No one saw it as damning evidence. It was well constructed in the documentary. I've seen some of it. I think some of it was sent through to Cricinfo at the time. I don't think, as cricket journalists, we did not see any of that as damning evidence. It was a very well put together documentary, and there is absolutely no doubt that there are things there, but evidence, no. And I think that's the thing that you see again and again in cricket, is that it's easy to raise an eyebrow. It's not very hard to prove. Sorry, it's almost impossible to prove any of this sort of stuff unless it all starts to fall down. And I've gone down the rabbit holes of trying to talk to these people. The people who are doing this don't want this to come out, right? Like, I'm not. It's a really closed world that is an illegal world. It's not quite the same as the drugs in sport angle, because drugs in sport is, we can blood test, we can do regular testing, we can have a look at a doctor who's now worked with 10 different people, and they might have only been caught once, but the 9 other people who've worked with them who've won gold medals, we can look back at. We don't have these kinds of spider legs in match fixing in the same way. And I think that until a journalist or a bunch of journalists work out how to trace it back better, we're going to always be in this sort of weird limbo land of waiting for huge breakthroughs from investigative journalists. The other thing is that there's no money in following this. Um, uh, there's I've never been given any money to do an investigation on match fixing, even when I've had what I would say is very good circumstantial evidence. It's not the way that the cricket media has worked. And so if you think about it, Al Jazeera, who you mentioned, News of the World, there's another one as well, isn't there? I think there's three major ones. They all come from outside of cricket when they did this reporting. And I think that's really, really telling that cricket does not have a system in place for this. Libel laws make things very tricky as well, don't get me wrong. But I do think a lot of it is, if you had a cricket writer who you thought was a really good investigator, and they were backed for 12 months, I think they come back with incredible stories. I think there's a lot of former players out there that want to tell their stories as well. And again, it's hard to get them. On top of all that, and I don't know how much this is talked about, but within cricket, people believe Hansi Cronje was murdered in that plane crash. Like, I've heard that 1,000 times if I've heard it once. They truly believe that coming out about match fixing and saying things that you did and giving details could end your life. I think Lou Vincent might have talked about that before. I think other people have talked about that as well. That is probably, again, another level of hardcore above what is happening with the doping scandals, which makes it even tougher. But look, there's no doubt that there needs to be some kind of a reckoning. I don't know what the answer is, though. I don't know if it is a media thing, if it's an ICC thing. It's one of the other things that is really, really tricky, and again makes it, and I think I've written about this before, is because of the international nature of cricket, it's so hard to be able to follow people with their multiple mobile phones and multiple legal jurisdictions. I can't even say the word, that's how tricky it is. So the whole thing is far more difficult and twisted than the drugs game is. And let's be honest, performance enhancing drugs is bloody hard to work out. For me, I always went down the corruption side of things. And when you try and go down the corruption side of things, of where the BCCI's money goes, for instance, and why a bunch of people on a committee suddenly changed their vote, why this team couldn't get a big sponsor, and now suddenly, with a new chairman involved, gets a very big sponsor. All these sorts of things that start to happen. Cricket is so small that it gets really uncomfortable. And I think that if you're not funded to do that, I could see why most people wouldn't. When we did Death of a Gentleman, we were told they were going to ruin our careers and we wouldn't work in the sport again. And Sam hasn't, if we're being fair. I think part of that's his choice, but also don't think that he was particularly wanted. I think by that point, I'd kind of forced my way onto the industry and couldn't be shaken off as easily. And it is tough. A lot of cricket journalism is access journalism. And the ICC are not a police force, right? And global police forces aren't particularly, great. So it's a really tricky one. It's a great question. I think there's a part of me that thinks that there is far more fixing going on than we'll ever know about. But there's also a part of me that knows that we probably won't see most of it ever. And I think there's a way that we watch modern sports where we kind of have to accept that, whether it's sports washing, politics in sport, gender in sport now through the whole, turf trans nonsense. And by trans nonsense, I mean, people suddenly pretending they're interested in women's sport because they don't like trans people. All those sorts of things. We watch sport kind of knowing that all that is happening, and we turn off. You can watch Usain Bolt without thinking, did he cheat? Even if you might think he might have. I think that we've come to that point where so much is going on in sport. And I remember when the Sky Racing, or whatever they were called, the Sky Cycling team were doing really well. And my thought at the time was, the way they were talking, it was quite clear that they were breaking rules. And I remember then the Houston Astros, a very similar thing when I read the book on the Houston Astros. I did podcasts with a guy who wrote the book on them. And again, I was thinking, if they're willing to do all this stuff, they're also cheating. And I think right across sport now, whether it's fixing or cheating to win, or doping or any of those things, I kind of feel like we already know enough, and we've decided that we're going to watch it anyway. I don't know how that helps. We've gone into a long rant there, Alan, but I don't. That's kind of what it is, right? That's what we are watching. We are watching a golf tournament from Saudi Arabia with a guy run by a guy who used to be very close friends with Donald Trump. That is completely a tournament that is there so that we think of Saudi Arabia in a positive way. But if we like golf and there's a bunch of golfers there that we want to watch, and there isn't a major tournament on at the same time, we're still going to watch it. And we might know intellectually all that other stuff. And obviously listeners of this podcast are going to be different than maybe casual sports fans, but whether we know or not, it doesn't seem to stop us watching that often, is I suppose the best way of putting it.